Well, I want to welcome my friend to the show, Josh Hammer. He is the host of America on Trial. And Josh, I'm glad that you're here. So the name of your podcast is America on Trial. And I feel like the verdict is in, Josh, and America is screwed.
Yeah, Sarah, I think that's a pretty accurate summation of where things currently stand. I'm definitely not going to be someone who's going to tell you that you're being too pessimistic or that we need to try to look on the glass half full side of the ledger or anything like that. That is definitely not what I have been preaching for the past 24 hours or so. I think that this is disgusting. It is horrific. It is obviously unprecedented. You know, I mean, growing up, I've been a news junkie my whole life. My grandpa was actually in the newspaper business after he was also a lawyer himself. So I grew up, reading a lot of news. And I have these fond childhood memories. And I can quite literally remember reading about foreign countries that did this, that someone gets into power and then they prosecute and try to throw in jail their political opposition. The way that I phrased it in my column out this morning was I wrote that it kind of has this scent, this whiff of like medieval England, where the king deposes his arch rival and then sentences him to rot in the Tower of London on the River Thames. This is the 21st century, and this is America. This is America. Sarah, I'm a lawyer, as you know. I went to a great law school. I worked at a big law firm, clerk for a federal appeals judge here. I have published constitutional scholarship. I lecture at law schools across the country here. Has that been a lie? Has this all been like a mirage? Yeah. These are the questions that even like fellow lawyers, judges, we're all having these conversations. A very, very, very dark day, Sarah.
Yeah, when you can have obviously you are a conservative and you're not bashful about that. But when you are in agreement with someone like Alan Dershowitz, who is not a conservative, and you guys are, but you're attorneys and you understand what the legal system and the justice system is supposed to be. By the way, Josh, I said earlier, I'm no longer calling it the justice system. It's the injustice system at this point. And I think that it's just fake to even try to call it the justice system. But to have this system, you guys know it like the back of your hand. And when you guys are in agreement, this is wrong. There is something very seriously wrong here. So I want you to kind of, and by the way, I'm glad that you said you're not just trying to be pessimistic, because I think I dropped like 3 or 4 F-bombs earlier. I'm not proud, but it happened because I'm just like, guys, I'm not exaggerating. This is serious. Like the red alarm is sounding and flashing, like something has to happen. And I wrote last night on my social media that in order to have any sort of semblance, just any whatsoever, it might take decades to build back up, but to get any semblance of trust and faith back in the legal system, we are going to have an overturning of this decision. I don't even know if the faith is restored then. I don't know that I would ever believe in it. But if there is a chance at that happening, this has to be overturned. Do you think that will happen? And if so, what is the appeals process like? I know Donald Trump has said that they're going to appeal it. So what is that process like? And do you think it will be successful?
Okay, so with the caveat, Sarah, that I'm barred in your great state, the state of Texas, not barred in New York. So I'm not an expert in New York State appellate procedure, but I'll give it my best go here. Okay. So Trump is going to be sentenced in July. His sentencing is July 11th. That's 3 days before the Republican National Convention. Doesn't seem like a coincidence there, right? Right. Seems pretty deliberate. Yep. So the sentencing could go one of many different ways. Merchan has a lot of flexibility and wiggle room here. He could just send Donald Trump to Rikers Island. He could give him, probation. He could give him house arrest. There's various ways to skin a cat here. Now, one thing that's interesting that I had honestly forgotten about until a friend actually messaged me very shortly before you and I came on air, there actually is a federal mandate that former presidents have not just Secret Service around them, but actually armed security, armed Secret Service around them. What's interesting is that Rikers Island and actual prisons in New York City, and by the way, let me just pause and say that it is disgusting that we're even having this conversation, by the way. Disgusting. But Rikers Island and New York City penal colonies don't actually allow for armed facilities where the actual prisoners are. So there's actually a bit of a federal state law issue going on here, which is an interesting constitutional question that Trump's lawyers might take up during this sentencing, because under the United States Constitution's supremacy clause, federal law is always supreme to state law. So maybe that actually does mean that he has to go to house arrest. Having said that, I won't name names, but over Memorial Day weekend, I was out for a very good buddy's wedding out in Iowa. He's the current Solicitor General of Iowa. It was kind of like a legal eagle wedding of some sort. And I asked some, without naming names, I asked some high-ranking people in the vast right-wing conspiracy legal world what you think is going to happen to Trump. And basically, to a T, they all told me that Trump's going to jail. So that is my instinct as well, to be honest with you. Again, this Secret Service arm thing does throw a bit of a wrench into that. Now, the appellate division could stay that. They could stay that immediately, essentially, if they wanted to. They could essentially within hours say, no, you're actually not going to jail. This is stayed pending appeal. Go do your campaign rallies in Michigan, Pennsylvania, whatever. They have that ability. Whether they would do so, I have no idea. It's impossible to predict. The current appellate division, which is above Juan Merchan in New York City, has 21 judges in the entire appellate division. Now, it's impossible to know which judges would be on the panel, which would be reviewing a stay. And then it's also impossible to know who would be on the actual appeal. The big question, even bigger than all that to me, Sarah, is, well, the Rikers Island thing's a pretty big deal, but possibly even bigger than that is, will we actually hear an appeal before November? Right. And that seems unlikely to me, to be honest with you, because that would be a very expedited timeline. They might do it, they might not, but I think the Democrats all along, Sarah, have wanted to run against a so-called convicted felon, yes. And unless they expedite it, they're probably going to get their wish.
Yeah. What about, I've been reading some legal experts who have said that there could be a potential play to take this to the Supreme Court. What, do you know anything about that?
So I saw Mark Levin talking and writing about this. It would be a common writ, which you could theoretically do. Mark's argument is he's citing Bush versus Gore, which is the very controversial December 2000 case that essentially decided the 2000 election down in Florida. It was an equal protection clause ruling that essentially said that some ballots were not being counted the same as others. So Mark is basically saying that if you look at what is happening here when it comes to obvious election interference and the fact that this trial was held now, they could have easily delayed it. All the other obvious deficiencies and infirmities that have characterized this entire proceeding. What Mark says is that there's a possible Bush versus Gore equal protection clause problem here. I like their creative thinking a lot. At this point, I see very little harm in Trump's lawyers trying to do that. I'm not going to lie to you. I think it's a bit of a stretch, and I don't think that the justices would agree to do that. But I see no reason not to try, honestly.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last question on this. I always knew, I was just talking about this earlier, I knew that their intention was clearly to send him to prison. They wanted Donald Trump in prison. That was very clear to me from the get-go. But I honestly, in my heart of hearts, did not expect this case to be the one in which they would do that. Were you like, well, it's in New York City, he's screwed? Because every day that I read through the evidence, I was like, there's no way, as much as you could possibly hate Donald Trump, there's no way as a juror you can look at this and say, yes, I'm comfortable finding him guilty. There's just no way. I had faith in humanity that wouldn't happen. And I honestly was like kind of shocked that it was this particular case. What were your thoughts on it as you were walking through it?
So when the 4 indictments dropped last year, so there's 4 criminal indictments, obviously. There's New York, Georgia. Those are 2 state cases. Then Jack Smith's 2 federal probes. Yeah,
we need a flow chart so that we can tell which indictments we're talking about. Go ahead.
Right. So when all 4 of these came down, I personally was of the opinion that the Georgia case actually was the most dangerous of the 4, whereas the actual underlying conduct was potentially most legally problematic in the Florida case, the classified documents case. Jack Smith messed up his hand there because he invoked a ridiculous statute, the Espionage Act, this dusty World War I controversial statute. He whipped out this ridiculous theory of the case there. If he had gone on simple obstruction charges in Florida, I think Jack Smith could have actually had a semi-viable case there. But the New York case all along was a joke. I mean, this was, legally speaking, by far the biggest joke of the 4. Not even close, Sarah. By far. I mean, how do I know that? Because Alvin Bragg's own predecessor, Cy Vance Jr., in the New York County, New York DA's office, who was a bit of a left-winger himself, lest I add, he looked into this exact same theory of the case and declined to prosecute. The federal prosecutor's office in the SNY, the Southern District of New York, they also looked into this and declined to press charges. So Alvin Bragg brought it because he's a Soros-funded hack. And all along, Sarah, when this indictment dropped in March 2023, I saw the 34 counts. It's 34 counts, by the way, for essentially the same thing.
Yes,
it's just different ledger items in the accounting book.
Yeah.
But, the only way that Bragg could get around this statute of limitations problem was to say that it's in furtherance of something else. And I was waiting. Are they going to tell us what that something else is pre-trial? No. Is it going to come during trial? No. I learned with the jury instructions, which is when I assumed that the rest of the world learned. It is such a farce. And yes, to your point, I did hold out some hope all along that of the 12 jurors, 2 of them were lawyers. Right. One was a corporate lawyer, one's a civil litigator. They're probably liberals. They're probably libs. They're lawyers in New York City. But at a bare minimum, a lawyer who had the same legal training or similar to what I had should be asking very basic questions, such as what is the freaking source of law that we are trying to send someone, let alone a former president of the United States, to jail on? And apparently that did not happen.
Yeah, exactly. It is a very sad day for our country and for our legal system. I appreciate you, Josh, all of your hard work. Everyone make sure that you are following Josh. And it is America on Trial, although... Josh, we do have a spoiler alert. We know we're screwed, but make sure that you check it out. Josh, it's always a pleasure. We'll see you soon.
See you soon, my friend. Thank you.
If you like this clip and you want to see the full episode, click here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, come on, you know you do. Click here.